pianists, teachers, colleagues, and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach the Toccata in F minor by Robert Vandall. It sounds like this. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson, and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. Now, I know that this piece is a bit of a departure from my normal historical intermediate repertoire fare, but I had two reasons for wanting to feature this piece. The first is that this month's Ask Me Anything video in my Patreon community is answering the question, what is rotation? And I'm going to talk about rotation as a technical concept in this piece, and it's a great vehicle for teaching that to an intermediate student. The second is that in one of the many Facebook piano teacher forums, a teacher recently asked for recommendations on a flashy piece for a student who needed something that sounded really great but wasn't actually that hard to learn and play. And this is probably my top recommendation. It has a lot of technical things, but it's so repetitive and it sounds much harder than it actually is. So this is an ideal piece for a student who doesn't like to read, who wants something patterned, who does have some technical facility. You know, it's using some upper intermediate techniques, but it sounds so much harder than it is. So we're going to talk a lot about technique in this video. First, just a couple of main features. This is in F minor. It should not be your student's first experience with a flat key. Besides the repeated accidentals of those first chords in measure 4, which are the D natural and E natural part of the melodic minor scale, it does stick pretty well within the key signature, so it is a good practice for playing in F minor. It's in 4/4 time, but has mixed meter in that we get these little interruptions of 6/8 time. So you can certainly use this as a piece for explaining that we're going to keep the 8th note micro pulse steady throughout. The 8th note is always going to be the same, but that the bigger beat is going to shift. Instead of feeling it in 4 or perhaps even in 2, because this is marked presto con fuoco. So if I count it in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. We get those dotted quarter note beats in measure 4. So that's just something that you need to make sure you address. It wouldn't be my main teaching point of this piece, because if you demonstrate it and you play with steady 8th notes, then your student is automatically going to just play a string of steady 8th notes as they go through this. To mention another Patreon resource, the Q2 workshop for my Patreon partners was a book study on a book by Elvina Pierce about teaching students to practice. And if you ever encountered Elvina Pierce, you know that she was really big into identifying form, labeling sections, and having a student break a piece apart. It's really not 4 pages of music if you identify the sections. And that's absolutely the first thing I would do with this piece after a demonstration, hearing a recording or hearing a teacher demonstration of it, to ignite that excitement about this very flashy, fun, fast minor piece. So I've broken this down into A's and B's and C's, and these sections are generally 8 measures or so. The first A section I've called A1, that's the first 2 lines, first A bars. Then there's the B section, the next A bars. At 17, we have what I'm calling A2 today. And the only difference there is that the left-hand bass note is different. So it's so similar, but it's not starting on F in the left hand. Then we go back to B, and then we have an A3. It's the same pattern, but the pitches are entirely different from measure 1. So you can kind of see how I'm breaking this up. It doesn't have to be called A's and B's, but the main point of this exercise at the very beginning of study is to allow your students to see how little material the composer used when composing this. It's the same ideas, slightly transposed or transformed over and over again. And so that reduces overwhelm. It gives them a plan for how to practice. It gives you the ability to say, these are the sections I want you to focus on or practice this week. And it helps a student right from the very beginning have an overarching idea and concept for how this piece was composed. Ultimately, it will allow your student to play expressively because they're going to know that the dynamics build at the end. They'll know they have to play that ending, the final A section, differently from the previous A sections. They'll be able to think about, what's the storyline, the overall program of this piece. So you can see all the ways that this is beneficial. All right, let's move into technique. This piece has a lot of octaves in the left hand, so you do need to give this to a student who can comfortably reach an octave. And this would be a great opportunity for reminding them that on the quarter rest, say in measure 1, 2, and 3, they should release that hand position and not hold it. It's going to happen naturally because they have a single C on beat 4 in 4/4 time, or they've got the quick accented Fs in measure 4 and measure 8. So play the octave, lift, and then more volume, more accent. And then we come way up. That's my second technical thing that happens in this piece, is that it uses the whole keyboard. So there is an actual technique that we have to teach our students, especially if they start as a young child and then they're growing, that is to have a very balanced torso, to find good balance. Alexander technique teachers will tell you that our bodies when sitting are like a tripod, right leg, left leg, and then if you imagine that your spine, your vertebrae continue down through the bench, that would be the third leg of the tripod. So your rear end is stable here and your two legs are stable here to make that tripod. From there, you can play very high or very low by moving over this way, allowing your arms to freely move, including the entire forearm in front of the torso. That's one reason it drives me absolutely crazy when students sit too close, because then they look like a penguin or a Tyrannosaurus Rex. There's no freedom of movement across here. Encouraging them to get taller when they go to the bottom or taller when they go to the top to allow for even more movement. Oftentimes my students kind of crunch over like this, and that actually cuts off the amount of length of arm that you have. So thinking that your head is traveling up to move over this way. So in measure 9, the B section, left hand starts down on that low F octave. Body gets taller this way to come here. Arm is aligned behind this A flat and E flat in the treble clef. Take the whole arm back down. There's plenty of time to do it because it's whole notes, and that's one reason why this is written so well for a student who's practicing that technique. All right, so let's talk about rotation. Some people call it forearm rotation, some people call it wrist rotation. It's the movement that you make when you're turning a doorknob. And so if you're interested in the idea of this movement, please check out the link to the Patreon video in the description of this video. But the principle here is that I do not have to use any individual finger movement to play any of the right hand notes in measures 1, 2, and 3. If I place my hands on that F minor 5-finger position and I use rotation, the weight of the arm moving side to side is all I need to actually play those notes. So you can see I'm not using any individualized effort. And this means that I can play very fast. If I play that with individual finger movement, it gets louder, it gets heavier, and I'm slowed down. But I can shake this out, because I've been practicing rotation for a while, at a very fast speed. And then I can fall into, I can even rotate to get to that D. As you play those main patterns, again, you need to kind of have your body over this way, your torso, and align the arm behind this first place in bass clef. And then it comes up here. And eventually it gets all the way up here, which this is a very comfortable alignment for the arm. As the volume builds, especially when we get to fortissimo for the last few measures, You can even use more of that kind of throwing rotation, like a more exaggerated movement to get all of that volume. And you can really rotate. I missed it the first time, but you can really rotate up to that last octave. Let's talk about a few problem spots, things that might throw students off, especially those students who are playing this piece because it is highly patterned and they are not your strongest readers. The section at measure 33 is the G flat version of this A section. So left hand's on G flat, and this is where the right hand needs to be really conscious of the key signature. Basically, if you remind your students that C is a white key, C natural, most of the rest of this is black. So G flat, there's that C natural, move to A flat, C natural again, move to B flat, and then, and you can definitely block these chords, E flat first inversion, E flat second inversion, F second inversion, to help students, especially if in the middle of that section they're getting confused. I don't find that as helpful in measure 4, but you can certainly label and block those there as well. The other main trouble spot is what I'm calling section C in measure 41, and I have split this. 41 is C1 and 49 is C2. And this just, again, has a lot of movement. This is a place where you do want to spend a little bit of time analyzing what the chords are. They are all second inversion chords, triads. So right hand starts with G flat major. That G flat is not in the key signature. And jumps down the octave. And then just keeps going up using the key signature. The left hand always matches the right hand jump. So whatever you start with out here, you're jumping to the same chord when you come in for the next beat. So G flat, left hand's on E flat, jump to G flat second inversion. This time it's A flat major, back to G flat, change the bass note. I would probably circle that or highlight that in some way. Back to A flat major. There's just no getting around the fact that you have to do some repetitive practice on this. And so we really have, I've talked about this in other pieces, we have 3 parts here. We have the right hand set of chords, we have the left hand set of chords, and we have the left hand bass note. So you can practice these in different combinations. Right hand alone, left hand chords alone, bass alone. You know, that's real simple. E flat to A flat, but make sure they hear that, and that takes you to D flat. Then you can do combinations. You could do the bass line with just the right hand chords. And then there's no excuse for missing the change there. You could do the bass and the left hand chords, or you can do the right hand with the left hand chords. And then that helps highlight when they line up and play the exact same pitches. Also important to note the accidental in measure 55, that creates a diminished chord. So it's kind of like a C7, an interesting C7 chord. We resolve down to C in the bass with the left hand right there. Because that gets tricky right at the end, I would definitely have my student drill those last 2 bars, 55, 56, and then work backwards up all the way up to measure 41. And I would just give them the speech. You know, the first part is really fun and really easy once you learn that pattern. And every student who plays this kind of slows down and slogs. So I would likely give them, once they're playing the whole piece, the instruction of starting every day at measure 41. Or maybe I would instruct that in the first week of practice. Who knows? But definitely avoid the syndrome of always starting at the beginning. And you can reinforce that this matters by asking them to start there in the lesson. You know, we don't always have to just hear pieces straight through from bar 1 to the final double bar. Ask them, okay, I'm really excited to hear the first page of this, but can we spot check measure 41 first? And, you know, jump into that, make sure they've practiced it. And if they haven't, then, you know, you can remind them, I am going to hear this next week. So start practicing there. Okay, last thing for problem spots is the very, very end. The left hand ends with a F octave with the C inside. So this is 84 and 85. Make sure they understand that's still just the octave. You've thrown an extra note in there. And the right hand little eighth note before the final beat in the left hand is very awkward because it's G flat and C flat. Those are two notes that are not in the key signature. I would break this down first by just playing the thumbs. So right hand G flat to left hand F. And I would get my student really just comfortable with just going right left. I would do that a little bit by rote. I would not worry about them reading this exactly because it's quite complicated. Then I would do it with just the octave. So right hand G flat, left hand F. And then we would put the middle note in and make sure they're thinking C flat. And again, you have to decide how much you're going to assign in the first week of practice. If you're going to do only A sections, then spend some lesson time on this very end. And again, in a lesson, you can say, let's start with the end. Can you play those last two for me? And work backwards, because also measure 83, that left hand. That's different than any other pattern. Pattern pieces are amazing. All music is based on patterns, and so it's great, it's very natural. So it requires us to practice more on the places that break the pattern, the places that are not what our brains and ears expect. All right, I hope that gives you a few ideas on teaching this very fun, very flashy piece. Please do check out the links in the description of this video, and I wish you all the best in your teaching and playing.